Namaste, everyone. Welcome to the Cārvāka podcast. This is your host, Kushalmehra. All right. Today's podcast is based on a report. Let me pull that report up on the screen for your benefit. So, the report is called Anti-Hindu Hate in Schools by Charlotte Littlewood. This is being published by the Henry Jackson Society. And to talk about it, I have with me Charlotte. Charlotte, welcome back on the podcast.
Thank you again, Kushal, for having me on. It's always wonderful to speak to you.
All right, Charlotte. So before we get into the subject matter itself, for transparency, because I believe it's always better to have. So, what was the methodology of the report? So, how did you go about collecting your data? What were the indices that were looked at, and what was the entire methodology?
Absolutely. So, this report is actually somewhat of a series. So we've been looking at minority discrimination in schools. We did a report earlier in the year that looked at anti-Semitism in schools. We're picking to look at underreported forms of discrimination. So there was a really good study done by the YMCA that looked at anti-Black racism in schools, very thorough. There's been study into anti-Muslim racism in schools. So we looked at anti-Semitism at the end of last year. And we followed the similar methodology to that project, which was to send freedom of information requests, which is a request for information that you're legally obliged to respond to. So we sent freedom of information requests out to all the schools in England. And then we narrowed down the results to those that had Hindu pupils. And then from that, we took a purposive sample of 1,000 schools. And what we learned from the freedom of information request, which asked whether there had been any anti-Hindu hate, bullying instances in schools in the last 5 years, and it described what that might look like, and it came out as less than 1% of records of anti-Hindu tagged to any form of bullying or discrimination in the school. So freedom of information requests to the schools, less than 1%, saying that there's been any issue at all. Then we looked at surveying Hindu parents. So we sent out surveys through community groups, parent groups, Hindu temples and organisations across the UK. So it was a national study. And we had 988 respondents. And within that, the Hindu parents surveyed said that 51% of them, their children had reported some form of anti-Hindu hate incident in school. So what this tells us, which is very different to the results we got with anti-Semitism, by the way, what this tells us is that there is a large-scale issue manifesting in schools, and the schools are not noticing and recognising that at all or reporting on it. Then when you go into what is being reported, some of the parents opted to give sort of case descriptions. We get into really harrowing descriptions of what is happening, and we look at their confidence in the schools, and it's very low. I'm sure you're going to want to ask me about the different incidences, but that's how we did the study. So FOI and then a large scale survey.
So when this survey is done, what kind of questions are asked, if you don't mind? Because I know it's part of your report, but just for an example, like what kind of a back and forth is done? Because one of the criticisms that could be leveled, and often I do too, because one of the problems with surveys like these is that they are very driven on the basis of what kind of questions you're going to ask. Because, for example, what if somebody asks a loaded question? So you're always going to get a certain kind of answer, right?
Yeah, absolutely. So, the survey started off with the ethical considerations. So we ensured that we weren't going to disclose any information about the children or the parents or the schools. And then we asked if their child had faced any kind of anti-Hindu bullying in school in the last 5 years. That was a simple yes or no. It had a few examples, whether that would be mocking of Hindu cultural dress or attire, or whether that would be mocking of Hindu practices. And then that was a yes, no. And then we moved on to if you'd said yes, would you volunteer details of any cases that was optional because we had to consider the well-being of the participants, and requiring them to detail things could be stressful. So that was an optional question. And again, reiterating, do not give away any personal details, anything that could disclose who they were or where they lived. And then we moved on to, what do you think schools could be doing? Are schools, well, we started with, did they think that schools were able to identify the issue? Then we think that schools were able to tackle the issue? And then what do you think schools could be doing better? And then a final section for any additional comments that parents wanted to make. So it was a short and sweet survey. The questions that we wanted answers were to, is there an issue? And how do parents... Yeah, the survey was meant to be concise so that we could have as many respondents as possible. And the main aim was to find out if they felt that their child had suffered any anti-Hindu hate at school. If they had the confidence and the will to share that with us, then that was wonderful, because we were able to get a real insight there. And then what do they think the schools could be doing to improve their approach?
All right. So there's one specific thing in the report where, and I'm going to put it up on the screen too for the benefit of everyone. So you guys say understanding and identifying anti-Hindu hate. The study relies on the Macpherson principle. The principle states that complaints about incidents of racism should be recorded and investigated as such when they are perceived by the complainant or someone else to be acts of racism. In essence, reports of racism are to be taken in good faith. Could you elaborate a little bit on this? Because I want to understand this.
Yeah, so the Macpherson principle is something that we have had in the UK since issues of anti-Black racism were not being taken seriously by the police in the UK. And the Macpherson principle is used when we're looking at issues of racism. It's been used to look at claims of anti-Semitism as well. And in essence, it means that when a claim is made, we take it in good faith. Then we come from that point before we, like if it's a police investigation, that it will be taken in good faith first and then investigated, rather than negated on the offset as, oh, this is some kind of political agenda, or this has been falsified for some ulterior motive. No, what we do is we look at it and we say, this claim has been made in good faith, and then we look at the evidence.
All right. So, but it is... So how would you define it still? Like what gets classified as anti-Hindu hate? And let me express why I am saying this is because the way anti-Semitism is defined, the way, let's say, Islamophobia is defined, the way, let's say, anti-Christian Christianity or Christian attitudes are defined, come from a certain way of looking at the world, which is, I don't know how to say, it's very Judeo-Christian. They look at in a Judeo-Christian way. Now, Hindu families and Hindu kids and Hindu cultures are different. So when you were in the process of defining what qualifies as anti-Hindu, so how would you decide this is anti-Hinduism and this is not?
So we relied on a number of different definitions and approaches in the report. But in essence, what we were looking at was whether Hindu children were being discriminated on account of their Hinduism, and whether they were being held accountable, for example, for actions of the Indian state that might be perceived as negative. British Hindu pupils, for example, being bullied because of perceived actions of Modi in India. We were seeing that. Issues around the differences in the beliefs and bullying around multiple gods, polytheism, telling them that they're involved in idol worship, that they're going to go to hell. In essence, any attack on someone on their personhood, we consider to be a prejudice, like a racial prejudice or religious prejudice. So we used a number of different approaches and combined that together. And we had examples that we gave to teachers and that we gave to those in the survey to be able to understand that, is someone being bullied repetitively because of their dress or their attire that's connected to being Hindu, or their diet that's connected to them being Hindu. So, for example, having beef thrown at a young woman on account of them being Hindu, you could say that that was just someone having food thrown at them. But if they're having beef thrown at them because they're Hindu, because of the sacrality of the cow, that then becomes anti-Hindu rather than someone having food thrown at them in a kitchen.
Okay, so this is a very tangible criteria where you can find it. But sometimes, and I'm not speaking about it in the sense of microaggressions or anything, sometimes it's very hard for people to even understand that X or Y could actually bother um, Hindus. Uh, uh, like a lot of times, certain words are used on social media for Hindu kids. I mean, I face it, by the way. I mean, I get called a cow piss drinker almost daily. So, so did you guys like classify or categorize this into on digital social media, digital hatred, real life hatred? Were there different criterion? Were you guys measuring that? What was that report that had come out? I forgot the organization in America. I think they also did an online analysis of anti-Hindu hate. So did you
Yeah.
guys use some of that criteria too?
So what we did was we took the detailed responses and we broke them down into categories. We didn't look at whether they were online or in the classroom. I mean, we were talking about anti-Hindu hate in school, so we would expect that that's playing out actually peer on peer in school. We didn't ask that, but what we did look at was what types of cases have been described and whether they were coming from a right-wing xenophobic ideology, whether they were coming from a Christian supremacist ideology, or whether they were coming from an Islamic supremacist ideology. And that was really interesting, actually tagging the responses according to the kind of cases and the kind of ideology that was driving the hatred. And what we found was that that Hindus are facing issues because of a multiplicity of ideologies. So we found xenophobic hatred on account of skin color and curry eating and kind of, I hate to say this, but sort of like typical racisms that the school would be very well versed in identifying and dealing with. Then Christian supremacist approaches. Basically, we had an incident of someone saying to a peer, "Oh, you can't come into church because you're a Hindu and you worship multiple gods." And another child told, "Oh, your gods are going to burn in the hellfire unless you come to know Jesus." And then we had something that was really worrying, and this was sort of the main of the responses. So when we broke them down into categories, not every single case was able to give us a sense of who right was driving the hatred, but when they did, we had double the amount of those coming from Muslim peers than we did white Christian. And within the cases that described Muslim peers saying something, it was things like convert and the bullying will stop, encouragement to engage with radical extreme preachers, and use of words like kafir, again slurs like you said, kapis drinkers, which are coming is a slur that is coming from the subcontinent because of conflict there rather than something that's growing organically in the UK. So what we noted was multiple factor hatred, essentially, coming from multiple ideologies. And then obviously really concerning is that the schools are then not picking up on this. And it's really, really sad to see and to say, but it looks like the actual teaching on Hinduism is feeding into the bigotry and feeding into what we're seeing in the classroom. And in fact, a couple of the cases said that directly after classes on Hinduism, the bullying would increase because the teaching is coming from sort of an Abrahamic faith lens, and in fact is quite colonial in its approach. And it's sort of saying, you know, that the Abrahamic religions are more true, they're monotheistic, they're given more respect. And then Hinduism is being taught from that Abrahamic position. So it looks at the gods first rather than looking at what really Hinduism is. I mean, I even remember actually as a child learning about Hinduism And my lessons, the resounding memory of my lessons as a child in Hinduism, was just drawing the different gods and coloring them in. So this kind of approach, this God's monotheistic sort of God-centered approach to learning, is then also feeding into the bigotry and the bias that we're seeing in the classroom.
That's very interesting, because there is a section in your report that you've called Abrahamic othering. And I want to focus and spend some time on this aspect, because I think that is a core issue that a lot of Hindus have been trying to explain to this. It's a very funny way. I had, a very nice guy, a Pakistani stand-up comic, who came to my podcast, and I told him, like, sometimes monotheists don't get it, that, they would say casual things like, oh, you're going to hell, to a person who's not from a monotheistic background in that sense,
Yeah.
because their concept is very different from where they come. And these things can, in a multicultural society, now if you're living in a society that just has one religion, or a religion and different sects of it, it's fine. Or a religion and, or all three Abrahamic religions, even they would understand that. But because of the sheer magnanimity of the way of looking at the world, for example, in the case of Abrahamic religion, the creator and the creation are distinctly different, right? They're not the same. The creator and it's very dualistic in its way of looking at reality. I'm talking about the religion. I mean, I personally don't believe in any divine claims, but with Hinduism, it's very different. Like, the most of Hinduism that is practiced today, although there is dualism in Hinduism, but the mainstream Hinduism that is dominating today is Advaita. And in Advaita, the creator and the creation are one. So we have the saying in Sanskrit, it's called Brahmasmi. I am one. I am one with the creation or the creator. Everything is one. Now, in such a scenario, it is very different for a Hindu kid going there. And another major difference is Hindu kids, by and large, not only just me, I have rarely met a Hindu kid who was not taught that. What I call milk toast Hinduism. Look, there's milk toast Islam, there's milk toast Christianity. Everybody has a milk toast feeble version. The milk toast Hindu version is all gods are gods. So you can pray to Jesus, you can pray to Allah, you can do whatever you want to do. You the Hindu kid will be taught that. But the problem is the Abrahamic kid will not be taught that, because the Abrahamic kid and I'm not saying that they are to be blamed. If you ask me from where I'm coming from, they're being brainwashed in that sense, right? And they
Yeah.
but how does one deal with this conundrum? Because you can't say, oh, Abrahamic religions can't teach that. But then how does one sensitize them to there could be other realities too, or truth claims?
Yeah, I think I think it's really difficult, and I think we're already starting on the back foot when, as you said, the conceptual side of things is very difficult. If you've only known and been brought up in a Abrahamic faith culture, how are you going to conceptualize something that the thinking is completely different? You have to completely change your frame of thinking. So that makes it very difficult. But then you've got, as you said, the issue that the Abrahamic faiths, I think also, another thing to add to what you said, they're also proselytizing, right? They're also wanting to spread, and Hinduism is not in the same way. So you've got one set of thinking which lends itself to supremacism, lends itself to aggressive pushing, whilst the other doesn't. That lends to issues too. But I think it's about, you can have different opinions, you can have different wants on your religion and what your religion should be and whether it should spread, but you have to respect and tolerate each other. And that's what we need to foster in the classroom, is that you can be on the other side of the fence on things, but actually human on human, you have to tolerate each other. There has to be a zero tolerance to violence, zero tolerance to discrimination, racism, prejudice, and hate. Otherwise we're screwed in the UK. We're on an upward trajectory of diversity here. We've got a whole melting pot of cultures and religions. So it's vital that the fundamental core is that we tolerate and respect one another, even if we disagree.
So, I mean, how do we get out of this mess? I'm genuinely trying to be, sympathetic to the other side also, because look, if you are a Christian or if you are a Muslim, I mean, your religion says the other side is going to hell. It is what it is. I mean, they didn't make it, right? They were born in a system. And as existentialism says that you're just born in a running train, kind of existentialist philosophy talks about it. And sometimes decisions are made for you, and you're just hopping onto the train and you're taking the ride. Yeah, you might make a tweak here and there, but this is kind of a fundamental thing. And idolatry, which is something that Hindus do a lot of, is again, like in Islam, for example, it's called shirk. It's not a good thing. And I mean, the Quran is quite clear. I'm not saying Hindu texts don't say bad things. I mean, before somebody accuses me of something, I'm kind of known for attacking all religions. But the point is that this is a fundamental problem. Like, it's very interesting that again, I'm not saying you're wrong to use that word. You use the correct word because of a uniquely Abrahamic problem. And I want to use something of a Hindu scholar, Rajiv Malhotra, and he talks about this tolerance. Like, the only thing an Abrahamic society, when I say an Abrahamic society, a society where Abrahamic religions are the majority, even though they're secular, is actually tolerance, is because of the binary nature. But just think about it. Like, Charlotte, you and I, if I'm in London and you and I meet over coffee, and then I tell you, Charlotte, I'm tolerating you on this coffee table. You see how condescending that sounds? You see what I'm trying to say? It's very condescending at its core.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. But I think that's the best we can hope for, because you've said it, that at the core of these faiths is we are the one way and every other way is wrong. And beyond that, I mean, that's between the Abrahamic faiths. But actually, as you said, from the Abrahamic faiths looking towards non-Abrahamic faiths, there is absolute condemnation in the text. And that's understandable because that's how the texts were created. It was out of these ancient religions created this new way of being, and in order to form that and carve that out of the society, it had to condemn and damn the old and bring in the new, and that's what's written into the texts. And it's we can't be thought police. You can't control what people are thinking, and we cannot change what's written in these texts, and we cannot ban religion. So what you can do, not that I'm advocating for that, what you can do is you can ensure that people behave well with each other, and that you have laws in place that ensures equality and tolerance. It sounds like a condescending word, but I do think that's the best we can do in a society where the texts are in parts hateful of one another, and we have to deal with people that fundamentally believe in those texts and put those texts above the law. Christians do that too. They put that faith above the law. God's law is more than man's law. So what we have to do in the UK is have the rule of law. We're all under it. Our individual liberties, our equality, tolerance, cohesion, all these fundamental values absolutely ingrained and confidently defended. And I think that's where we run into trouble in the UK, is that confident defense of these values in the face of religious minority aggression. So when we're really pushing for things like equality and tolerance, when we're looking at issues like anti-Semitism, anti-Hindu, LGBT, we're running into head-on sections, extreme sections of the Muslim community that are very vocal and that have political currency. So I go back to our tolerance, equality, and cohesion. I just think that's where we have to exist. That's what we have to foster, and we have to be really brave about it. And that is difficult.
Yeah, because from where I come from, and I always say this to my friends in the West who don't come from Hindu backgrounds, is I was like, I think you must be one of the first people who's actually started understanding this culture, this side of the world, and that's why you've come to empathize with the plight of Hindu kids, is because, oh my God, their whole worldview is completely opposite to the Judeo-Christian or Abrahamic worldview. So for them to even hear things like this is actually kind of triggering, and it's extremely depressing for them to like imagine you're a small kid in school. You're like a 12-year-old, 13-year-old, 14-year-old. You're having a casual conversation, and your friend whom you play cricket or football with, luckily I don't have to use any other analogy with a Britisher, because you would get cricket. Otherwise, American is, what the hell is cricket? That's another problem. So and that person would say, oh, you're going to hell. It could really damage a Hindu kid. And I know this for a fact because I have family outside India. Their children have faced this. The child comes home crying. They're like, these people are saying I'm going to hell. Am I going to hell? Did I commit something wrong? So how does one, because at its core, religions are truth claims. They're not the truth. I say this with full responsibility. And if it hurts somebody who is devoutly religious, well, too bad. Let you be hurt. I am saying this, religions are truth claims. They're not truths, including what Hinduism claims. These are truth claims. Now, how does one then go and tell young children that, kids, when you come to the school, you might have something taught to you at home, and that's fine, that's your personal life. But over here, we are going to respect all truth claims, and science is the ultimate truth. It ends there. How do we do that?
I mean, I think schools are trying to do that. I think that we have, since 2015, a legal obligation for schools to teach fundamental British values, which include equality and tolerance and respect between the different peoples of different faiths, individual liberty. So I do think that is being written into the very nature of British schools. But I think the struggle is more in how certain groups are vehemently and in times aggressively holding their truth above others, and teachers don't know how to deal with that challenge in the classroom. So although they may be teaching these values and they may be building curriculum around these values, we've had, for example, recently 3 incidences now where two LGBT Muslim teachers and one just LGBT teacher have been opposed very passionately and recorded on phones by groups of Muslim students in the classroom, saying you can't teach your sin here, and you can't be LGBT and Muslim. One of the LGBT Muslim teachers faced death threats and pictures of chopped up bodies saying that he will be next. And the schools don't know how to deal with this because they then face huge pushback from the parents. And we have these very nasty Islamist organizations in the UK that are using this issue and creating like activist sort of movements. They use news platforms and media sites, Islamist ones, to put these recordings out of the teachers and to write about it and to rally more parents. And they managed to garner huge crowds outside these schools, which is very intimidating to schools, very intimidating to the teachers. And this, I think, is the real issue. Although we have the law in place and we have the culture in place in the schools to teach equality, we've got such an aggressive pushback right now. And schools don't know how to respond to that without then being perceived as being racist. It's a really difficult, political, sensitive situation.
One more issue that I want to talk about, because this article has recently come. What was it? The Telegraph has published an article on 18th April 2023 by Neil Johnston. He's a senior news reporter there, which the tagline is "Muslim pupil tells Hindu classmates to convert to Islam to avoid bullying." Now, obviously, it is related to a lot of work you are doing. Now, let me put this in context. Again, this is a unique place where Hindu kids are always going to have a problem because, a lot of people in the West have seen Hare Krishna going around dancing, and maybe they might, but there is no, and I again use this word with full responsibility and no shame. Abrahamic religions, not Judaism, but Christianity and Islam, have a problem of predatory proselytization. I am not saying they should not be allowed to proselytize. I am not saying that. Freedom to propagate religion is something, no matter how cringy I find as a disbeliever, it should be allowed. Like when I used to live in Canada, I used to have these weird moments where Muslims and Christians would come to me and try to convert me. I used to find it so weird. And let me explain to you why I used to find it so weird. Because as a 20-year-old kid who was born and raised in Mumbai, not once did I ever face it in my Hindu circles. No Hindu came to me and told me, do you want to go to Krishna, or do you want to go to Shiva, or do you go here? It's just not a thing in our culture. And then you are suddenly exposed to this predatory system where the Christian wants to save you and the Muslim wants to give you dawa. It's very annoying, and I again say this with full responsibility. It is annoying. So how do schools deal with this? Like, no conversion allowed inside the school premises then?
Well, I don't think that's even possible, you know. I think it's about how people interact with other children. You can try and share an idea and convince someone of your idea, and you can believe that taking up that idea would be really good for them without being hateful. And that can be done about many different things. And I don't think we should ever limit people's ability to share ideas and try and convince people of them, because there will somewhere in all those ideas be a good idea that we've then limited. So I do think we must be able to share ideas, but it's about being able to push back against those ideas safely. And it's about sharing ideas without being hateful, intolerant, or intimidating. So threatening someone with hellfire or saying that they're going to go to hell, you know, if they don't adopt this idea, is hateful and intimidating. Saying to someone, you have an idea about how the world works, you think it's good, you'd like them to hear it, is not hateful and intimidating.
Fair enough. Now let's get into other bits. Now, obviously, the report has finally someone has given a working definition of Hinduphobia again in a report. Otherwise, people keep complaining about this. I don't want to focus on the full disclosure. I actually am opposed to all kinds of things like this. Like, I don't believe Islamophobia is real. I don't believe Hinduphobia is real. That's just my view.
I also don't like the word phobia, which is why I said anti-Hindu hate. You know, I do include a definition of Hinduphobia because it's something that a number of academics have been working towards, and that's the term they've used. And it was useful because it laid out examples, and it was a good and robust definition. But I would much rather use anti-Muslim hate, anti-Hindu hate. I mean, for two reasons. One being that phobia, being a fear, is a very silly way to look at this. This is not a fear. Hate and prejudice is not always fear-based. But also that we want to be able to engage and debate and critique around these issues. We want to engage and debate and critique about what is written in the Quran, what is written in the Bible, in the Torah, what is a part of the different texts that feed into Hinduism. And if we create something that says Islamophobia, then that in the very essence of the word says that we are not to critique and engage with the ideas. So I have strayed away from that word here, but I have tried to incorporate different opinions on how we can form a definition just to use for the purposes of the report and the purposes of helping support teachers and understanding what they're looking for in the classroom.
All right, so now let's get into one more issue. Again, I'll share my experience of living in Canada and studying there. So this is about Hindu education in schools. I'll explain through examples. So when I went in Canada, I went to the library, and I was like, okay, let's try to figure out what do they say about my culture and my people. Look, every religion has standard pop culture stereotypes, right? What is the pop culture stereotype of Christianity? Love. It is all about love. Nobody can deny that. That's the pop culture stereotype. What is a pop culture stereotype that has been tried to be projected from the Muslim community? And by the way, I don't have any problems with these stereotypes, because as much as I would, let's say, want religion to reduce, not saying I want to, but even if I wanted to, it's not going anywhere. People just like religion. Too bad for me. Now, the Islamic pop culture stereotype is Islam is a religion of peace. That is the stereotype. Sikhism has its own stereotype. Well, guess what the Hindu stereotype is? Caste, cows, and curry. That's the Hindu stereotype.
and you saw in the report that is actually being taught in the schools, not the cows and curry part, but caste is coming into as young as primary school age classes on Hinduism. And I mean, there's so many reasons why that is wrong, and very angering. Because, and I think the main one, even coming away from the fact that you can argue that there are elements to which caste comes from parts of the scripture, and you can talk about the extent to which it is still in India, which it is, and how much that might be related to Hinduism. But it's actually not about that. It's about the approach we take to teaching religion in schools at a young age, which is at primary school level. It's about teaching tolerance and a positive understanding of each other's beliefs. We do not teach children at primary school age about Islam and start talking about some sections are radical, look at what happened with 9/11. Like, absolutely not. We talk about the key tenets of the faith in a very positive way, in a very kind of shallow, positive, here's your ABC of Islam, here's your ABC of Christianity. But then it comes to Hinduism and it's, let's draw some gods and talk about the caste system.
Yeah. And you know what the funny bit is? I only know one country in the world where Hindu hatred has been made an art form inside the school curriculum. There's only one country, because I read their text. It's Pakistan. And to find these kinds of things in the Western world, where the Western world now has reduced itself to be compared with Pakistan, a theocratic state, is a damn shame. You know, this is like you're born a Hindu kid, then you go in Western schools, and then a target is put on your back or your forehead, literally. It's like, yeah, this guy has this. Look, the whole purpose of teaching milk toast religion, feeble versions, pop culture religion, is everybody feels good. Oh, all religions are nice. I know. I mean, just imagine Christian kids going to school and they say, oh, Leviticus and Deuteronomy says stone the homosexual.
Right.
I'm not making it up. They do say it.
Yeah. And that you mean that's the nail on the head there, really. You could start looking at these complex issues maybe at A level, but we're talking about primary school and secondary school here, and I don't think this is coming from Pakistan. You know, I know you didn't say that, but you said it comparing it to Pakistan, how awful. But I actually think this comes from a real colonial mindset in the UK. This comes from our own Christian background here in the UK, and the perceptions from the Bible on perceived polytheism, however you take it. I know some Hindus say it is, some Hindus say it isn't, but it's that perspective on polytheism and the place in which Christianity came from at a time that was pagan in culture, and that how that was a move against that, and then that's written into the text, and then that's written into the very culture of the UK. Then the UK goes and colonizes India and is a very, very arrogant and disrespectful perspective on Hinduism that then feeds into the early textbooks and the early way in which that's taught. And that hangover hasn't gone anywhere. So that bias, that prejudice outlook, that Abrahamic supremacist outlook hasn't gone anywhere. And now we're dealing with a situation where we've got increasing extremism and communal conflict in the UK, got rising diversity, we're getting hateful narratives from Pakistan penetrating the diaspora, and the teachers and the textbooks are still spewing colonialist crap about India. So it's really an equation for disaster.
Not only is it an equation for disaster, it is going to create such a huge problem of Hindu hatred in the long run. And they're not realizing is now you guys do suggest some solutions too, and I want to focus on the solutions, but I just want to take a question from a live viewer, because I think it's a very sensible question. And this is a young Hindu guy who lives in Canada, and the person has asked, then what should the parents do in this scenario? Should they take the child out from the school? Because the other side in this case being the state apparatus, they're not going to be teaching their kids how to integrate and stuff like that. So what does a Hindu parent do in this scenario where they feel their child is constantly being challenged all the time?
It's really very difficult. I mean, on a practical sort of level, from the benefits schools and society going forward, which is the unemotional response here. There's obviously an emotional response, but taking the emotions out of it, the thing that would best benefit practically the Hindu community going forward would be making complaints to the school, going and speaking to teachers, speaking to other Hindu parents, trying to create parent groups that can then go forward and speak to the teachers in force, and following all the kind of steps that raises the issue and puts pressures on the schools and lobbying governors and parliamentarians and that sort of thing. But also you're dealing with the fact that your child is feeling unsafe, and the kind of cases that we saw. We had one boy that had to move school 3 times in East London because their anti-Hindu bullying was that bad. So, I mean, on an emotional level, if your child doesn't want to go to school anymore, there was a lot of that in the report too. My child just doesn't want to go to school anymore, or we've had to remove the tilak because it's just causing too many problems. When that's the case, you have to do what you can for your child and move school. But, it's incredibly difficult. I think I actually did it. I had issues at school, but moving school is really hard and a real toll on everyone. And but I think in some of these severe cases, that's actually the only answer.
So something very interesting that I figured out in Canada, by the way, because there is no official report being done in Canada right now, but if surveys are done, they'll find similar patterns over there. But credit to one of the school district boards over there, what they started doing about this was they have these heritage months every month. So they will have a Islam Heritage Month, they will have a Christian Heritage Month, they'll have, let's say, X Heritage Month. So one of the months in Canada is Hindu Heritage Month. So what happens is at that time of the month, there are special occasions created inside the classroom where different students or parents or a mixture of parents and students and teachers can come together and actually teach the children about the culture of that heritage which is being celebrated at that month. There are presentations being done, there are small programs being done, and there are key things being done, and do you think something like that should be done in the United Kingdom? Maybe it could sensitize people more that, look, there are other ways of doing this too, and maybe we need to have some respect for other truth claims too.
So we do have things like World Culture Day and Black History Month. So we do have that. I would actually be really worried in the current climate in the UK that something that even looked at celebrating Hindu culture would be attacked for being Hindu nationalist, and we would actually see a really nasty response. Not in the school, but if it was done in a bigger way, if it was done via social media or something that was done in the streets of London, I actually would be really worried about that. I don't know if you're aware that we recently had an attack on the Indian High Commission in London.
Mm-hmm.
So the situation is quite tense, which, I think that's probably one of the most damning things that I could say, really, is that we're at a point in the UK where if you held an event like that in some parts of the UK, it wouldn't actually be safe.
Well, that's not a nice thing to say about UK. It's insane. So now, in a very light manner, so how does it feel to be called a Hindutva agent?
Does that happen now? I mean,
Congratulations.
I have all sorts on social media. God,
Like, do these people know you're left wing?
I don't know. I mean, to be left wing nowadays seems to be right wing. The politics have gone mad. I mean, I do my job. I research on issues facing minority groups. I research on a multi-factor kind of different ethnic groups. So my PhD is on Ahmadiyya Muslims and the plight that they face in the UK. And then We've obviously just done something on anti-Semitism. We're looking at anti-Hindu hate. I'm about to move on to freedom of religion across the board, actually. So it is mad. You'll also find, I work in a think tank where we get called to go on the news quite a lot to talk about different things. And I'll refuse to go on and talk about things that I think are right wing. So I've been asked 3 times now to go and talk about, don't know if you know about this, but sending our refugees to Rwanda. And I've refused 3 times to go and talk about that because I think that is a deeply, it's a more visceral reaction to the idea of sending refugees to Rwanda. It's so insulting and awful. So yeah, I kind of laugh it off when I get these things because you know who you are in yourself and you know what you're doing, and I know that every piece of research that I do stands in fact and follows methodology that can't be argued with. And is backed to the hilt with references that go right to the original source. So there's nothing I've ever done or said that can ever be picked apart or actually seen to have some sort of agenda. So it doesn't bother me too much. It saddens me. I don't know. Some people who are watching today might have watched a debate I had on NDTV with a professor from Oxford, and actually makes me sad that there are people in such important positions and influential positions who would take the first ever report onto anti-Hindu hate in the UK and turn it into an attack on me and my organisation being right wing and politicise it all, negate the findings, make no attempt to engage with the findings or the issues the Hindu community faced. And she was Hindu, right? She was also Hindu. So to have no engagement with that at all and just dismiss it and say it's political, that's really sad and really worrying. But that's what we're up against. And that's why I say, even to look at Hinduism at the moment in the UK is to be right wing. It's something I've just written about for the Jewish Chronicle about how both actually the Jewish community and the Hindu community is both similarly facing this situation where to come to their defense is seen as right wing. And I think it comes down to the fact that the Hindu community are very well integrated and successful, relatively doing well financially. And that immediately puts you in a class of not the oppressed, but the oppressor. And
white adjacent. That's the word you're looking at.
Yeah, part of the establishment. Why horrible words like coconut are thrown around and things like this. It's this leftist lens of if you are in line with the establishment or if you are in some way seen as having authority, then you cannot be oppressed. You must be a part of the oppressors, and therefore you must be critiqued. And that's where Hindus have ended up alongside the Jews, I think, and white men.
Yeah, it's quite an interesting club to be part of. It's very interesting. Like, what happened to the good old days where we could have conversations about issues without judging? I mean, who cares? I've been very open about my political biases and political leanings. I've never hidden them. But beyond that, I'm still a human being, and I should be in a position to talk to people irrespective of that. But we just live in a very polarized way, and what you're suffering is I don't know how to put it. There was a political class in India that was used to some privileges, and those privileges extended overseas. In 2014, this political class lost politically in India. They thought it's a temporary thing, we'll come back again, but they lost again in 2019. They know they'll lose again in 2024. They just cannot digest it. So now they lash out their anger about their political outfit. Because look, all of these people, and I say this with no shame, most of these academics who are Hindus, they have been pushed and propped through Indian systems over there. And it is what it is. And their only way to raise to the top was basically hating India and hating Hinduism by and large. Before somebody comes up with an exception, I'm talking about averages. I'm not talking about the exception. And you're just stuck in the crossfire because you're like, okay, I'm just a researcher reading things. Hey, that sucks. And then they're like, oh, how dare you say that sucks? Don't you look at me, white lady? I'm the brown person. I'm telling you, hate them. So you better listen to me and hate them. But besides that, before we wrap it up, there's one more question. So again, this is coming from a Hindu kid. or a Hindu man, I'm assuming, is that if acting against anti-Hindu things can be seen as anti-secularism or whatever, what do Hindus do? Then do Hindu organizations actually end up opening their own schools then? Because if this is the way they're going to be othered.
I mean, there already is a situation, for example, in Leicester, where there are schools that are Hindu majority and there are schools that are Muslim majority, and parents will choose which schools they want their kids to go to, and they will move closer to that school to be in the right catchment areas for them. So I think that's already happening, and yeah, I do think we're in for more issues, really. We need to get to a point where we can bravely discuss these topics, and we can work on tackling extremism without being worried about being seen to be right wing, and there be protections in place around schools if there's going to be mass crowds turning up at the gates, and that head teachers can be encouraged to be firm on these values. Because if we don't have that, we don't have the protection afforded to the schools, support to the schools, then it will get to a point where everyone will send their kids to the school where they think their peers are going to treat them well.
So basically, multiculturalism that started about, putting people together, making sure that they interact with each other, mix with each other, learn of each
No,
other.
that didn't happen. No. Our multiculturalism started in the back of World War II, and we put people in different areas and actually didn't encourage integration and cohesion. And it's the failings of the early multiculturalist project that sees us in the divided position that we're in now.
So basically, multiculturalism was another fancy word of ghettoization.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, actually, multiculturalism, this idea that everyone should have their different cultures and be left to themselves, and that we should just have everyone is different but equal, and everybody's beliefs and values are different but equal, has got us to a point where we've tolerated intolerance, and certain groups have been able to push intolerant ideas under the protection of multiculturalism.
They clearly did not listen to Karl Popper then. That's all I can say. All right. So before we wrap it up, is there anything that you think we skipped and you would like to mention?
I think if anyone is interested in sort of what we're going to be doing next, we're going to be pushing the policy recommendations, which are very heavily focused on increasing the quality of teaching of Hinduism in schools. We're going to be looking at setting up consultancies on that and support to schools, and I'm probably going to help with that and not be too heavily involved. It's not my area, but sort of help people on their ways with those projects. And then we're pushing for a change in bullying policy at schools, that actually schools record the types of bullying, and that those records go up to the Department for Education, so we know what's happening in schools and we know how to give the schools then the targeted support that they need. So yeah, I think that those twofold recommendations are really important. But also we've looked at our prevent strategy, counter extremism. It's been found to be really lacking, that there isn't that expertise around Islamist extremism, and that the anti-India narrative coming from Pakistan is actually having a real impact on our diaspora, and that's just going unnoticed by prevent practitioners and unchallenged. So it will be continuing to beat that drum. We know that I think it's in a few days now, actually, Colin Bloom reports coming out. It's been waiting for it for years, on religion in the UK. And it's going to actually look at something that we haven't spent time looking at, but we're starting to really feel the effects of, and that's Khalistan separatist extremism in the UK. So my attention is going to be turning to that imminently.
Well, I look forward to your work over there, Charlotte. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. You keep doing your work. You're doing fantastic work. And if one day you find problems in the Hindu community, also you go after them too, and you showcase that too. And I will call you on the podcast, and we will discuss that too. You keep doing your work, and it's always a pleasure to talk to you.
Thank you, Kushal.
All right, guys, we'll wrap it up. As always, the link to download the report is there in the description of the podcast. I would highly recommend all of you to go to the website and download the report, read the complete report. I think you will gain a lot out of it. Also follow Charlotte on Twitter, and you know the drill. Please subscribe to the Cārvāka podcast YouTube channel. Like this video, leave your comments in the comment section. And if you want to support this podcast, you know it. This is a member-driven podcast, so please become a member on YouTube, Patreon, Fanmo, or buy the merchandise on kushalmehra.com. I'll see you guys next time. Until then, namaste. Take care. Bye bye.